Now, this is another one we go ahead and talk about some detail, and that's product. Mostly this is overlap because when you think product, you think, development, you think making the software work, right? It turns out that a lot of developers and software folks don't really spend a lot of time in user interface and UI, or they don't really understand use cases that much the way that customers use them. And they can be genuinely confused when you come back with suggestions based on user feedback. And that's fine. I get it. Totally understand. Working in the code is something that I don't fully understand a little bit, just enough to be dangerous. But there has always, in every single company I've worked with, there's been some level of disconnect between customers and development, some level. Apogee was the closest I ever saw to really nailing it. And I already talked about being on the support shifts with some developers and how that allowed them to train the customer success team and how that built up a really close collaborative relationship between customer success and development. And there were a ton of advantages to that, and sales too, actually. The biggest advantages being that instead of drowning in a bunch of badly written tickets without context, without screen recordings or anything like that, development had pre-trained the other teams in how to write really good support tickets with justification, with relevant links, with bug reporting, actual data, and was really able to reinforce a workflow that worked really well for their development schedule that worked really, really well. And the teams were empowered to actually communicate directly with development in a way that isn't necessarily common in a lot of software companies. And the teams interacted a lot. There's cross flow between customer and product and customers, and customer success and both. That was incredibly helpful for the long-term development of Apogee, for catching bugs, for choosing what features to build next, for choosing how exactly to build a certain tool, for making sure that the development schedule fully understood what customers needed when and what they were looking for and really enjoyed. It was hugely helpful, but also incredibly helpful to have the internal team know and understand product better. Because one of the reasons that product and development get so isolated from the other teams is that they are the most different kind of discipline because you're writing code instead of making phone calls or talking to people. And it's very natural for those disciplines to be just kind of separated, just because. So the natural kind of cross flow at Apogee between product and development and customers was a really powerful tool and another competitive advantage that worked really well. That was an important piece to having all of that in house. It was an important piece for making sure that the customer success, support, and sales teams were far more technically savvy than your average bears. That was incredibly helpful, and it's the efficiency benefit to product and development, having those better tickets, having the better context, having that full understanding of what the actual requests and issues were, saved development a ton of time and clarification that otherwise would have really bogged them down. So even though they did lose some of their time to working with people teams, it really helped save time down the road. So it added to efficiency, also supercharged the non-technical teams. It was just a really good overlap. And that's a lot of what I have to say on this. But also, I mentioned before that on support, one of the mobile developers was one of the very best people to have on customer facing calls, especially solving crises, especially if it was very technical customer, especially to kind of explain what was going on with issues or why we were building things a certain way from a technical perspective, which helped me then field those questions later, but also was just really helpful for the customers to have that direct contact with the tech folks to be able to have those conversations at that level. And when I talk about this lead mobile developer, I don't want to leave the rest of the team behind because there were a ton of software developers who were excellent at working with and talking to customers. They started out great, they got better, and then it just really built out, again, that level of trust from the customer base. They were able to meet the developers. They knew the people actually writing the code. They were able to actually talk to them by name, which is huge. That's one of those enormous advantages of being a small company and a startup, and something you can really lean on for early growth that can build later growth, and then hopefully you have built in a sustainable way into the company. Yeah, again, it's one of those things that really does help build that long-term relationship. It makes your team more robust. It makes your customer more confident. It makes your product develop better. It makes support smoother and easier. It makes bug chasing so much better. All of it just works better because of that crossover and that human interaction with the product and development team. I'll leave it at that. Well, it's also really important that product and marketing work together as well, and sales, because we talked about the good fit customers. We talked about marketing really understanding who they were marketing to. When your magazine is going out, when your newsletter podcast is going out, you want to make sure that the things that they're saying are true, that they understand the product enough to speak on a technical level, to not make promises that it doesn't do, to talk a little bit about the structural why of some decisions, at least, to understand on a basic level, at least. All of that helps reinforce a consistent pitch, a consistent company approach, a consistency to everything that again builds trust. Because if you have a sales team that's very salesy, and then a support team that's very distant, and then a dev team you never see, and then a customer success team that doesn't know anything about those departments, that shows and affects customers too. And they will think it's just another siloed company that doesn't know what they're talking about, that like what's that? The right hand isn't talking to the left. I forget the saying. But this whole idea that like everything is disjointed, and so we can't trust their future development as a company, as opposed to kind of just naturally assuming the company is going to continue to develop in a healthy way indefinitely into the future, which is what happens when the teams are clearly aligned, to use an overused word. But yes, I absolutely love product and development. Having a customer-centric product and development team is such a joy on every level. It makes everything easier, makes everything better, and it's just nice. And I think it's good for developers too because they get to have a lot more tight-knit relationship with the company that than they typically have. And of course, some developers are the kind of people that don't want that, and that's fine. But a lot of developers, I think, miss that by being in the technical side and do appreciate that extra level of interaction. So that was a quick one.